Alright, Sirens fans, we got another busy packed show today. Not going to waste too much time here in the lead-in. If you're tuning in for the first time, welcome to Siren Sounds. I'm Lou Orlando, cover the New York Sirens for Sportsnaut. By the time this episode comes out, Phase 6 of PWHL expansion will be underway. All that is free agency. Call it the open signing period. No restrictions, no holds barred. It's what you know free agency to be, right? Anyone can go anywhere. We'll maybe get into it a little bit. I'm recording this on a Friday morning. I wanted to wait a little bit just to see if anything would come out from Phase 5 with the Sirens with re-signings. Doesn't sound like we're getting anything on that end. So I kind of looks like all those players just going to go to the open market. Doesn't mean they can't come back. We'll talk a little bit about. There's I think a little more of a couple rules that are maybe limiting roster signings, at least going into training camp. That could be affecting that. We'll talk a little bit about Phase 5 and Phase 6 today. Certainly, it's already being reported that there's one target. It looks like the Sirens are going to sign, that in all likelihood will be signed by the time this episode comes out. So I think we'll talk about her. We'll talk about a few other players that the Sirens might target. But I don't want to get too heavy and too deep into the weeds on that because, obviously recording this in the morning, who knows what's going to happen. I want this episode to have a little bit of shelf life. Mainly going to talk about the draft today and the reaction to what the Sirens did Wednesday night in Detroit. So we will do a little bit of Phase 6 stuff, but the bulk of the free agency talk, I think we can save for next week and maybe, again, kind of do some more of a reactionary talk about how the Sirens shape up and how they look after a full weekend of free agency. In terms of the draft, I think what the Sirens end up doing Wednesday night certainly comes as a little bit of a surprise and was unexpected to a lot of Sirens fans. I think you saw that if you scrolled social media in any capacity, that a lot of Sirens fans were no doubt surprised with the route that General Manager Pascal Daoust elects to take. And I won't lie, I think I wrote in that article that I might have even said that it felt like an inevitability that the Sirens were going to draft a goalie. Got that one wrong, eh? So, clearly, a little bit of off base on that. The reporting right now, Ian Kennedy posted this maybe about 10 minutes before I started recording this, is that it looks like they're going to sign Elaine Chuli in free agency. So we'll talk a bit more about that. In terms of this draft class, though, it's 4 forwards, 2 defenders, so it's an all-skater draft class. Headlined by Emma Peschel, who's a really talented defender coming out of Ohio State. Grace Wolfe is the other defender. They get her in the 5th round, St. Cloud State product, same college that produced Dale Ross. And then you've got 4 forwards. Elisa Holopainen really is the big one out of the SDHL, Finnish forward. But then you got a couple Yale forwards, Carina DiAntonio, Naomi Boucher, and I think a really interesting Penn State product in Katelyn Roberts. So we'll get into specifics, we'll get into team fit and scheme fit and all that stuff. There's, and I'll put some of the, you can see on the board here, some of the talking points, some of the things that we're going to get to today. We'll talk about some of the debates and some of the questions that I think come out of this draft that we have to talk about in terms of Pascal Daoust's decisions. But in terms of just a simple draft roundup, before we get into any of those specifics, I want to start here. I think the draft order debacle, we'll call it a debacle, I think that's at least somewhat fairly apt, is it certainly hurts the Sirens here. Picking 7th when I think throughout this offseason, or at least leading into, through most of this expansion process, I think mostly everyone expected that the Sirens would be picking 3rd in this draft. You wonder whether the Sirens, from a scouting perspective, were prepping for that. All the reporting is that the Sirens had no idea where they were going to draft until Monday, 48 hours before the draft happens. Which, that alone is kind of wild to me. The Sirens aren't alone in that. Every single team that wasn't named the Vancouver Golden Eyes had no idea where they were going to draft. Is that fair? I don't know. You have the expansion teams coming in that didn't have GMs until like a month ago. So, for them, it's a little bit of a rush process too, where how much scouting are you actually able to do? I guess it puts the rest of the league more or less in the same boat. Maybe that evens the playing field. I'm not going to get on my soapbox a ton about this decision. I think the window to do that probably has mostly passed. I'll just say that I'm certainly surprised. I don't agree with the decision, and I don't think that's necessarily coming from any Sirens bias. I think what made most sense, there were two routes that would have made a lot of sense, and that's putting the expansion teams either in between the playoff and non-playoff teams at that 5 through 8 spot, or putting all of them after the existing teams and having them pick 9 through 12. Clearly, the PWHL wants their expansion teams to be competitive. To a certain end, I can't blame them, especially in a single entity ownership model. It makes sense that they're going to want to prioritize some of those spots, and they pick some pretty big spots at that. Detroit's hockey town for a reason. San Jose has a hockey community that is really exploded over the past 20, 25 years. You look at the Sharks. Vegas in the past 10 or so years has become not just an exceptional hockey market, but really an exceptional women's sports market when you look at the Las Vegas Aces. So, and just a sports market in general, right? We talk about the Raiders have moved to Las Vegas in the NFL. The Oakland A's are eventually looking to get to Las Vegas. It's a place that every major sports league is trying to get to. So it's not surprising to see the PWHL go there. And Hamilton, right? I think some people have complained because it's close to Toronto, but any Canadian market has a decent chance to draw fans, right? Especially a historic hockey market like Hamilton, right? So you're not surprised to see that the PWHL wants those teams to be successful right off the bat. And I don't think, that these expansion teams are going to be superstar powerhouses the way it looked like Vancouver and Seattle were last year. But you're certainly putting those teams in a favorable position ahead of a lot of your existing teams. I'm not sure that I would have done this. The rationale was Vancouver won the gold plan, Seattle finished last in the standings, and so they get the top 2 spots, and then it's the expansion teams, and then it's the other 2 non-playoff teams. It's a really rough draw for New York. They should be irked about it. If you're a fan, you have every right to be really ticked off about this. I think it's a really confusing decision. And I think sometimes it's okay that expansion teams aren't super competitive right off the bat. You don't want them to be all the way on the other end, non-competitive. But I'd point to 2 of the most prominent expansion stories in recent memory are the Vegas Golden Knights that would have been 2017-2018, and the 2025 Golden State Valkyries in the WNBA. And both were teams that, coming in on paper, looked like the worst roster in the league. And end up having these really successful seasons, both make the playoffs. Vegas goes all the way to the Cup final. I'm not saying that these expansion teams have to have by far the worst rosters in the league. But I'm not saying that you necessarily, on the other side of that, need to go out of your way to make sure that they can be potential loaded playoff teams right off the bat. And who knows what that'll be. They'll still have their uphill battles of building new chemistry and building a staff together on the fly. That's my overarching point. In terms of how it affects the draft, the Sirens are picking 3rd. Pascal Daou ends up saying that they came in with a priority of shoring up their top 4 defense. Caroline Harvey goes 1, Abby Murphy goes 2. I mean, it certainly seems like the Sirens would have been in the market for Layla Edwards, and you think about how impactful that would have been, both as she's a big name, she's a big star, but also her upside as potentially one of the best defenders in the PWHL. Right? It's a lot to dream about. Someone that you could have plugged in on the top power play. So that stings. I also think it would have given you more of a lane to draft Andrea Branley, the top goalie in this class. Now, the way the Sirens go about this draft, who knows if they would have gone that route. But you could have been in the market for, it gives you a chance to land a talented forward to that spot. Really, at every round, gives you a chance to land a more talented player. The Sirens, I think, have gotten credit, at least last season, for having a really solid draft. it's definitely easier to draft when you're at the very top of each round than when you're in the bottom half of each round. And that's where now the Sirens end up, they're basically in the middle at 7th, but you're in the back half of every round. And so there's certain talent that just didn't fall to them that I think they were interested in. And so, curious how this draft would have gone if they get to pick 3rd. I certainly think it hurts them in the long run. And Layla Edwards being the biggest one that kind of slips away. But in terms of this draft class, everyone feels a need. I think everyone will get into specifics. Everyone's a pretty good fit for this roster and the way New York plays, all things considered. And we'll get into the no goalies of it all in just a second. But, make no mistake, the Sirens needed skaters. I think they really, forwards specifically, they lost 4 key forwards in expansion. Huge parts of their scoring depth or their secondary scoring production. Like, they needed to go and replace that and get some forwards in this draft. And they did. And so, we'll look at the lines right here. This is basically where New York is at going into free agency. And I'd pencil in Chuli in that open goalie spot here. Going into free agency, it feels like, what else are the bigger need? What else are the big needs? 3C, a third-line center. Interesting because I think you can also kind of fill that just by signing a middle six winger and moving El Harchi to center there. I think you feel pretty good about her if she's your third-line center. Maybe being able to produce a little offense on that third line and play make a little bit. You're looking for another left-handed defender, I think, and we'll look at some of the options there. I still wonder if Nicole Vallario is someone that comes back, even though it doesn't look like she's going to be re-signed. So, those are the big spots going in. And then, you got to fill maybe a couple fourth-line spots. But, there's going to be a ton of fourth-liners out there in the open market. At this point, the market is mostly bottom 6 talent and, third-pair defenders. There's a few big names out there, but historically, the Sirens haven't been able to attract top free agents in the open market. Looks like that's, there's going to be another case of that this season where, that I don't think they're going to be in the running. Doesn't sound like they're going to be in the running for Kendall Coyne-Schofield or Emma Malte. They're linked to other teams. Or they've had a connection to Claire Thompson in the past, but at this point, I don't know that that's really in the cards here. It certainly would be a huge swing if they could, but that not necessarily something I'm expecting. And then you think back to last season, their one free agent addition really was Jinsey Rose, which is a former Olympian and certainly a known commodity in the PWHL, but not one of those needle moving stars that sometimes moves. So I think let's get into the bigger picture talking points of this draft. The decision not to draft a goalie, again, clearly that got a lot of traction online. It's something a lot of people talked about. Pascal Dou comes out and Rachel Donner covers the Sirens, was at Fox Theater on site, covering stuff, had a chance to talk to Pascal after the events. And basically what he told her was the Sirens weren't specifically hunting for a goalie. And he expresses some confidence in Callie Shanahan and Kaylee Doyle, who he drafted last season in the back half of the 2025 draft. And he talks about looking to land a goalie in the free agent market and looking at free agency as the place, the solution to that third roster spot. And all signs now and all reports point to that being Elaine Chuli. So we'll get into that in just a second. I'm curious what New York would have done if Brantley's on the board at 2 or if Tia Chan from UConn is on the board at 3. Because those are the 2 goalies that I really look at as being potential starters. I'm not sure that there's anyone else in this draft class that you're super confident that if you take them, either they're splitting tandem duties with Shanahan or they're your number one. So as crazy as it sounds to go into phase 6 of free agency and there's not really a starter, a bona fide starter in the open market, and you don't take a goalie in the draft, I do think there's some logic to it. I wouldn't have reached for Brantley at 1. I wouldn't have taken Chan at 2. You look at the talent on the board in both of those rounds, I think passing on either Peschel or Kirsten Sims to take Brantley is a big-time reach. Even though, I really like Brantley. I think she's going to be good for Detroit this season. I think she'll have a nice, solid PWHL career. I would not take her in the top 10 of the PWHL draft, and I would not take her over younger, very talented skaters in either Emma Peschel or Kirsten Sims. Tia Chan, if you're really high on her, could you take her in the second round? Right, we could have a discussion about it. But when you have a forward like Holopainen that falls to you at 19th, I think you have to make that play. New York had a lot of holes in its forward ranks. It needed to find talented offensive playmakers and people that can score, people that can provide secondary scoring. And Elisa Holopainen is that. And I think it would have been a mistake to pass on her at 19. There are risks with that pick. We'll get into them in maybe 10 or so minutes when we get into really breaking down each of the draft picks. But the talent there, I think, is too much to pass up. Brantley's off the board by the time the Sirens pick at round 2. Chan gets taken with the 28th overall pick in the third round by PWHL San Jose. I wonder if New York takes her in the third round. Because, it feels like they also were high on their third round pick, Carina DiAntonio. And that's another pretty talented goal scorer that is going to be, I think, going to fill a key role in this middle six, which is something that New York desperately needs. So I'm not even sure that if Tia Chan's on the board in the third round, that the Sirens are taking her. Reading up, I'm not going to pretend to be an expert scout or an expert on this draft class. I've certainly done my research and read up on them. It feels like the consensus is Chan's got a lot of athleticism, a lot of upside. It sounds that a lot of the pundits are saying that the best thing for her is to go into a situation where she's either the backup or she's the 1B. And is she going to be the 1B in a goalie room with Callie Shanahan and Kaylee Doyle? I'm not so sure about that. Again, that's an inexperienced goalie room. That would be... You enter this season with a goalie room of Shanahan, Doyle, and another rookie, and you've got a combined 3 games played in the PWHL between all 3 of them. That's not a great spot to be in. Now, expansion has kind of forced New York into this spot, and by the time we get to this point, there's no real starters on the open market, so even someone like Elaine Chuli, it's not like she's got a wealth of PWHL experience, but she has more than any of the rookies that are on the board. And the way that the draft experts talk about it, it sounds like Brantley was the one true goalie in this class that you felt good about throwing her into a starting role immediately. Even then, it's no guarantee that she's going to come out gangbusters right away. But we've seen her at the Olympic level. She's very talented. If she's there at 19, I think the Sirens have to consider taking her. Curious if they would. Again, the other part of this is that the Sirens historically have not been aggressive when it comes to goalies in the draft. And Kyle Cushman was quick to point this out. In the inaugural 2023 draft, New York waits till the 6th round to get their goalie, and they end up taking Corinne Schroeder. I believe that was 33rd overall. The highest they've ever drafted a goalie is 28th overall. That was Kaylee Osborne in 2024. Back then, it was a 6-team draft, so she was a 5th rounder. So that's the equivalent of a high 3rd rounder here. It seems like philosophically the Sirens aren't big on drafting goalies, at least drafting goalies high. And that certainly aligns, I think, with the general thinking in hockey the past 2 decades. They're in the NHL. This is not apples to apples because more teams in the NHL, and there's a developmental system, so you draft goalies and they don't need to be pro ready right away. You kind of let them simmer. The last time that a goalie was drafted in the top 10 was Carey Price in 2005. Like, it just doesn't happen a lot. I mean, it happened a bit at the turn of the century, right, with Rick DiPietro. The Rangers had a goalie they drafted sixth overall in one of those early 2000s drafts. Marc-Andre Fleury goes first overall. It happened a little bit, and then people kind of started to fade off of that. You really don't see goalies go in the top 10 anymore. You only see a couple really go in the first round every year, if that. So that Sirens philosophy seems to be more in line with that kind of thinking. I think part of the reason why you don't roll the dice on one of the other rookie goalies here that's not Brantley or Chan. Well, the first reason is, it's a roll of the dice. You have no idea what you're getting. It could turn out that, hey, you're really high on this goalie. She's got a lot of upside, but she needs time to develop. I mean, that was kind of the talk coming out of the Sirens camp last season with Shanahan and Doyle, was that they like these two goalies, but at the start of the season, they're not ready to play on an everyday basis. And that one of the reasons that Kaylee Osborne kind of takes the starting reins full bore and ends up going however many games straight in net and plays well and obviously deserve that run, especially in the first chunk of the season. It could be in a similar case where, all right, maybe it's Haley McLeod or Daria Gredson who ends up going later than projected, but, whichever goalie, Kate Dessau, whichever goalie you want to throw out there, a bunch of them could turn into PWHL regulars or really solid contributors at this level. But the Sirens need someone that can at least, at minimum, split duties from day one. And that is a big roll of the dice with anyone in this rookie class, but especially anyone not named Brantley or Chan. And again, maybe even Chan is a risk in that sense. The other part of this is, the Sirens really needed, I think, to fill forward spots. You lost Jarkowski, you lost Wheeler, you lost O'Neill, you lost Gerard. Those are four key players that were either in your top six or your middle six that played key roles. O'Neill was your top defensive center. The other three, I think, were really big parts of the offensive attack. Wheeler was a great two-way player. You needed to fill those spots. You need to find forwards you can plug into your middle six. And you look at where Phase 6 free agency sits right now. Yeah, there are a couple big names on the board, but like we said, the Sirens have struggled in free agency. They're not a big-time free agent market yet. They're not a big-time destination for big-time free agents. If you're trying to maximize skater talent, honestly, your best shot's probably through the draft. And, even if you're not a top free agent destination, you're going to be able to attract a free agent goalie because there's only 12 starting spots in this league. So, you could hate New York City with every fiber of your being, or you could hate Newark with every fiber of your being. And certainly there are people that do. You are not turning down in this league a starting goalie spot or a chance to split starting duties. Doesn't matter who you are. So, the Sirens know that they're going to be able to get a goalie in free agency. And again, it looks like Chuli is their pick. We'll talk a little bit about why that might be their best pick, all things considered. So I think from that sense, it makes sense to prioritize a couple really talented scorers in Holopainen and DiAntonio. Probably two skill sets that maybe not necessarily available to you in free agency. So I think from that perspective, I came into the draft harping on the Sirens need to go out and get forwards. It somewhat makes the decision in the first round very interesting, although we'll talk about that in just a second. So I honestly do think stacking up on skaters in the draft might have been New York's best move, especially once Brantley and Chan come off the board. And yeah, I know there are people that are in the camp of take Brantley first round, you need a starting goalie. I hear that. Andre Brantley's 29 years old. Are the Sirens a win-now team next season? That's my question. If you think you're a Walter Cup champion next season, or a Walter Cup champion caliber team next season, maybe you draft Andre Brantley in the first round. I think it's a reach. I think he'd be leaving a ton of talent on the board. But like for Detroit at 15th overall, right? That makes sense. They traded for Hillary Knight. They're kind of in a win now window here, that at least it seems. Okay, so go out and get a really solid starting goalie, or someone that projects to be a PWHL ready starting goalie. Sure. For the Sirens, they're a younger team. I think they're still developing. I think their championship window probably still a couple of seasons off. So, do you need to take a big swing on a 29-year-old goalie that, let's face it, she could have, sometimes goalies age really gracefully, and maybe she has a great 10, 11-year career. Emma Peschel's 22. Kirsten Sims is on the board. She's 21. Those are players that could have, if there's no expansion to take them away, and there will be expansion, but, we don't know the timeline yet. Those are players that, if they're really good, could have 10 to 15-year career in the PWHL. Maybe all of the Sirens say, we have no idea. I think that's really hard to pass up, and especially for this Sirens team. I think, right, Pascal Du at Exit Day compared this team to the Montreal Canadiens from a couple years ago. And his message was, give it time. A lot of young talent on this team, let them settle into form. And if you're an NHL fan, Montreal goes on a run to the Eastern Conference this year. A lot of young talent really takes some important strides and has taken some important strides over the last 2 seasons. So I think it fits in line with the Sirens seem to be focused on long-term value, and I can't fault them for that. The one thing is, do you worry about Fillier leaving in free agency? Her contract's up at the end of next season. My one of my things with the Phase 1 protections, I agree wholeheartedly, and I said that the 3 that they protected, Fillier, O'Brien, and Kaltenkova, is the 3 I would have protected. But the one thing I mentioned is that, if you have any doubt that Fillier is not going to be with you beyond next season, then maybe you should have protected Osborne. So if I'm the Sirens, I definitely want to make sure I can keep Sarah Fillier. And, if we get to next season and it's another missed playoff opportunity or a missed playoff season, and Fillier says, I want to compete, I'm out of here, then maybe we'll look back and you know what, Lou, you were wrong. They should have drafted Brantley. They should have done everything in their power to keep Fillier. I don't have enough on that to know, really, but, right, I'm not going to call you crazy for wanting the best starting goalie in this draft class. I'm just thinking a little more. I'm thinking long-term value here. I'm thinking the trajectory of this team, that they're young. 2-3 years from now, I think they'll be for the better that they took someone like Emma Peschel, or had they drafted a forward like Kirsten Sims. So that's kind of my thinking there. Elaine Chuli, it looks like, is going to be their third goalie. 8 games played last year, steps in for Reagan Kirk in March when Kirk goes down with the injury, has a little bit of run there. The stats on paper are not crazy good, save percentage below 900. But she's one of the top 2 goalies on the UFA market. It's her and Abstrider. And of the 2, Crease Giants had a really, really good post that I plugged talking about stylistically, Chuli is the better fit. And Crease Giants is more of a goalie expert than I am. So, I defer to them on a lot of this stuff. But the one thing that they talked about with the Sirens and the type of defense that they play is that they're pretty good at limiting opponents in terms of offensive possession, but right, they let up high danger chances every once in a while, and so they need someone that can make the big save on the big mistake. And Abstrider, pretty solid goalie, but in terms of those big mistake saves, Crease Giants doesn't think that that's Abstrider's strong suit, and thinks that Chuli is maybe the better fit for that in terms of her ability to move in the crease and make some of those big saves that Kaylee Osborne made last year that were so important to New York's success. Obviously, we were thinking a little bit about Kristen Campbell and whether or not the Sirens were going to trade for her. If they're signing Chuli, I don't think that's going to happen. I think maybe you got your hopes up when Vancouver drafts Denisa at the top of the 4th round. But In all likelihood, looks like they're going to go into the season with the goalie room of Mashmeyer, Campbell, and Denisa. Pretty good, all things considered. That's a luxury. Right, I think that's a tough one for New York, where you'd have to give up assets to get someone like Kirsten Campbell. And yeah, would she be the best goalie available compared to either Chuli or Abstrider? Absolutely. But I think New York's not necessarily in a position to trade away assets, especially for someone in Kirsten Campbell that it seems like in terms of her performance, the trajectory is kind of angling downwards. Now, again, I think she's clearly a step above Chuli or Abstrider or anyone else in the open market. So, in terms of who's your quote-unquote best available, if you're considering her as a trade chip, yeah, she'd be the best available. No one would complain if you gave up an asset to go get her. But the Sirens are going to go the UFA route, it seems. They're going to draft Chuli. I would expect more of a tandem this season. Like, I don't think Chuli comes in and it's, certainly not 27 games started, but who knows if it will even be 23 or 20. Yeah, I think we could see something similar to what Minnesota ran last season, where it's Rooney and Hensley, and they're going to be in a fairly even timeshare if everything works out accordingly. I think that places some pressure on both Chuli and Shanahan to make strides this offseason. Curious if goalie coach Gordie Woodhall can unlock anything here, anything in them, and get them to another level. Sometimes opportunity breeds success, so we'll see. But it appears like the goalie room next season is going to be Chuli, Shanahan, and Doyle, barring anything unexpected. The other big point of debate, at least in my eyes, is the first round selection. One of the unexpected things that happened in the draft is Kirsten Sims falling to number 8 overall, and Toronto Sceptres happily scoop her up. People had fun with me on social media, and rightfully so, when PWHL Hamilton takes Nellie Leighton at 6th overall, and Kirsten Sims is on the board at 7, which is not something I had on my bingo card. And I think I tweeted out something along the lines of, wow, Kirsten Sims drops to 7. Think this is a no-brainer for the Sirens. Clearly, wasn't a no-brainer. And they end up taking Emma Peschel. Gina Kingsbury, Toronto GM, had a quote that was, I believe, along the lines of, we were shocked that she was still on the board. I think a lot of people were shocked. If you look at a lot of the pre-draft rankings, most had Sims as a top 5 player overall. Kyle Cushman, who's one of the best to do it in this PWHL media sphere, he released his top 72 rankings ahead of the draft, and he had Sims 4th, and the second best forward in this draft class. That is, and that seems to be an opinion that is somewhat shared. Whether she's the second best forward or the third best forward in this draft, the consensus is that she is one of the top forwards and one of the top playmakers available. Now, on the no goalie route, I think I end up siding with Pascal Daou. I think that decision holds a lot of water, and the more that I've thought about it, the more I kind of agree with taking that route and stacking up on skaters in the draft. This one, I'm going to zag on this. I'm not really a huge fan of taking Peschel over Sims. I'm not against Emma Peschel. We'll talk about her in a second. I think she's an excellent addition to this blue line. I think there's a lot that Sirens fans have to be excited about her. I think that there are some very smart people talking about her as one of the top defenders in this class, and rightfully so. We'll talk about, she makes sense for the Sirens. 100%. I'm a big believer in having a lot of forward talent, especially in this league. I think scoring's harder to come by. Expansion, I think, will maybe even that out a little bit, where we'll see more scoring and we'll see goaltending across the league regress. But I still think having an elite forward like Sims which she could end up being. I think a lot of signs point to she's going to be a difference maker. Like, adding that to your team can be a real game breaker. Her playmaking ability is really something special. She's one of the top playmakers in this draft. Really good hands. Led the nation in scoring as a sophomore with 75 points. Yes, do the Sirens already have 3 top forwards, 3 elite forwards in Fillier, Kaltenkova, and O'Brien? Certainly. In my eyes, Sims is too good to pass up. And I would subscribe to the idea that, you can never have enough elite forwards, especially for a Sirens team that it's not like they have 3 elite forwards and then a bunch of, really good top 6, middle 6 talents. They have 3 elite forwards, and then their middle 6 is going to be players that historically, are solid offensive contributors, but not necessarily needle movers, or rookies that, we saw last season that rookies can kind of be volatile, and it's hard to adjust to scoring in this league. Right now, it looks like we're on track to have more conversations about that, about how are the rookies adjusting, and are they going to be able to adjust to PWHL goaltending? I say all that knowing that Kirsten Sims is a rookie, and that those conversations could also be applied to her. But Sims' ceiling and Sims' ability are on a different level than any other forward the Sirens drafted. It's not particularly close. This is a true Olympic talent that is, I think, going to be a very good forward in this league for a long time. And what should sweeten the pot here is that, she's not just line mates with Casey O'Brien at Wisconsin. They were dominant together. They were one of the most successful duos in the NCAA. And I wrote this in my article, my takeaways from the draft. You already know that Casey O'Brien and Kirsten Sims work really well together. That's a luxury. A lot of times you draft players, you're drafting for fit, and you wonder, all right, how's this player going to fit onto my team? What lines can I put her on? You take Kirsten Sims, you know that you can place her right next to Casey O'Brien and not worry about anything. Now, what happens if we add Sarah Fillier to their other wing? I think that, that's a dream line right there. And that's something that really could have been a special combination. You put all that in the pot. I think passing on Kirsten Sims is something the Sirens could really regret. Now, in fairness, Pascal Dou said the priority going in was shoring up his top 4. And I'll say hand up. I went into this draft going, okay, the big needs are forward and defense. I was kind of under the impression that they would bring back Nicole Vallario, maybe bring back a couple of their expiring defenders, and go on with go into the draft with one defender spot that they need to fill, and you get a defender in the 2nd or 3rd round, and you feel good about things. Clearly, they wanted to get a really solid top 4 defender, and you were not going to get someone like Emma Peschel in any of the other rounds. So, Allison Simpson signed somewhere else. They want to have a really solid top 4. I'll add to the fact that, if your goalie tandem going into the season is Elaine Chuli and Callie Shanahan, all right, maybe you want to have a really good top 4. So I don't think that this decision is as cut and dry as maybe I made it sound when I waxed poetic about Kirsten Sims. I think it makes a lot of sense for the Sirens to sign a defender. I think I was kind of a little off base on that going into the draft. I don't think I properly clocked that the Sirens had a need at defense that they needed to address early in the draft. But I will say, I'm very high on Sims as a player. I think that's the type of talent that you don't expect to fall to you at 7th overall. And when those things happen, I think maybe sometimes you throw out the script and you say, we're taking the best available player, and that's Kirsten Sims. The Sirens weren't the only team that drafted for need in the back half of the 1st round. There was a decent run of defenders that get taken there with Leighton and Peschel and Sydney Morrow. There were other teams that clearly valued defense in the 1st round. So the Sirens are not alone in that. It would be curious to see, if Kirsten Simms ends up being a perennial top 5 playmaker in this league or top 10 playmaker in this league. You wonder if the Sirens will kick themselves. If Emma Peschel turns out to be, a top pair defender for a decade, maybe it's simply a stylistic choice and you don't feel too bad about things. But, passing on Simms, that's a choice. It's a bold choice, and it's a choice that if Emma Peschel isn't a bona fide top pair defender, I think then that's a choice that we'll look back and can possibly criticize. Those are the two, I think, big debate topics that I really wanted to get into. It's time to break down. We'll go pick by pick. We'll break down all the members of this rookie class, why they make sense, what their profile is coming into the season. I'll say this right off the bat. It's very clear the Sirens have a particular idea of what they want to be and how they want to play. And I think you see that with pretty much every pick. And I wrote this in my article as well, that every single player in this draft fits a certain part or multiple parts of the identity that the Sirens and Pascal Daoust and Greg Fargo clearly want to establish. Not breaking new ground here by saying that. Like, every team, obviously, you hope to get players that fit your scheme and that fit the style of hockey that you're going to play. But there are certain times where the draft doesn't allow you to do that, where sometimes you have to take the best available player, or the players you had your eye on, they're not there when it's your pick, and you take someone that, maybe you're not sure of how they're going to fit into your system. I don't sense a lot of that with the players in this draft. I think the Sirens got a lot of talent that they feel really happy about. We'll start with Peschel. Left shot D, that the Sirens, they clearly needed help on that side of the defense. Prior to the draft, their only left shot D under contract was Micah Zandihart. It appears that they've let Nicole Vallario walk to free agency. I'm curious if they'll bring her back because I know that the coaching staff liked her. But as of now, you had a weakness on that side. She very clearly fits in, and the thing I keep hearing about her is pro-ready. Two-way defender that has clear offensive ability, but also really good defensive habits, and has the physicality that she'll be able, to slide into a top 4 role and be one of your most important defenders from day one. That's not always easy to find. I think she was likely the best defender on the board. Sydney Morrow, probably more of an offensive ceiling, but I think this is the best choice. The Sirens wanted to lean into defensive habits, and we've seen them embrace physicality. That was something that came out with Kristina Kaltenkova last season. She made it abundantly clear, I'm excited to play in the PWHL, I'm a physical player, I'm excited to have less restrictions than I had when I was in the NCAA, and you can't hit as much, sometimes at all. Clearly, Emma Peschel is someone that is going to embrace the physicality of this league.
So your size and your physicality make you as PWHL ready as I've ever seen. You look at this league, I'm sure you've watched a lot of games. It is a physical league. How excited are you for that?
Oh, I can't wait. I love playing physical. I love throwing hits when I can, and I know Ohio State played a very physical game, so I can't wait to bring that to the PW as well.
Your coach just smiled. He's happy to hear about that. Congratulations.
Thank you so much.
Right, so she sounds like a siren already. And judging off of how Greg Fargo handled Kaltenkova last season, and the reprise more often than not was, even as penalties became an issue for Kaltenkova, was we don't want her to change her game. Like, her physicality is a big part of why we drafted her first overall, and that's a big part of what she does. It's a big part of why opponents don't like playing against her. We don't want her to be less physical. You could see the Sirens taking a similar approach with someone like Emma Peschel. 5'10", like, going to be a strong player. And I think the pro-ready part of this is really exciting. Like, and maybe this goes against, in terms of, we were just talking with the goalies about, well, you want to draft players that have a high ceiling and you're thinking about long-term value. I think Peschel still has like a lot of potential to be a really good top pair defender. But you're also talking about someone that, it's a real value that she can step into the top 4 right away. Especially for this team that is going to need someone to step into that top 4. Is going to need their defensive core to be really good this season, because I'm not sure that you're going to get elite goalie play from either Chuli or Shanahan. We don't know. Listen, it could happen. We've seen players from one season to another make crazy strides. It was not a lock that Kaylee Osborne was going to be this great goaltender that she ended up being, or maybe great is too strong, because certainly she had her ups and downs, her struggles. But Kaylee Osborne did a lot of things that the Sirens needed her to do last season as a second-year goalie. So again, perhaps Chuli and Shanahan take a big stride and they help you out. But the Sirens need to cover their bases and make sure that they have a good defensive core in front of that goalie room. And taking Emma Peschel, I think, is a huge part of that. So the fact that she's pro-ready, I fully expect her that she's going to slide in next to Jamie Bourbonnais on that second pair. And I think you'll see them keep Zandy Hart and Nyland Pearson as that top pair. But Emma Peschel is someone with a top pair ceiling that is going to, in all likelihood, play on a second pair as a rookie. And I think that's a pretty good spot to be in. So she's an exciting pick. I don't want that to get lost in the Kirsten Sims debate. Yeah, I wrote this on my article as well. Like, if Sims isn't on the board, where I've landed is that I think Peschel would have been the home run pick. So, if you're a Sirens fan, I think you can feel really good about this addition in terms of what she can bring on the ice. Holopainen. This is another player that the mock drafts had higher than where the Sirens take her at 19. Cushman had her at 12, so that's a borderline first-round talent. I think Kennedy had her at 16. The reason that there's some risk here is she's a Finnish forward from Finland. Is what I mean by that. Finnish, right? Sometimes finishing is a scoring thing. Whatever. She's Finnish, and we've seen Finnish players struggle sometimes to translate their offensive game to the PWHL. Nora Toulouse is a prime example of someone that was one of the premier scorers in the SDHL, which is the Swedish Women's Hockey League, and it did not translate to the PWHL, and she ends up going back overseas after one season with the Sirens. Holopainen, right, there's a similar risk here in terms of, is her game going to translate? Of all the players that New York drafts, and we've seen New York lean into gritty, physical game, she doesn't necessarily check those boxes. I think there actually are some legitimate concerns or question marks about how is she going to handle, first off, literally a tighter game. It's a smaller rink. There's less room to operate offensively. And it's a more physical game. But I think what makes her exciting is it's the offensive skill set. And ultimately, I think it's a skill set that New York could not pass up on. When you look at the free agent market, I don't think there's a player out there that New York could realistically sign that has as high of an offensive ceiling as Holopainen does. And we're talking about, according to some people, including Kyle Cushman, a borderline first-round talent. Most had her as an early second-round pick that New York gets in the middle to back part of the second round. And what you like about her game, the speed jumps out right away. Right, we're running the Kyle Cushman highlight tape right now. She's so dangerous on the rush. I think that jumps out immediately. She's got pretty smooth hands, and she's got a good shot. And so you're talking about a player that had 51 goals in 2 seasons in the SDHL, tied for the league's lead in scoring last season, finished second this season. Now, right, again, Nora Toulouse was among the SDHL scoring leaders, and it didn't translate to the PWHL. But you look at Holopainen's raw tools, and it makes this swing worth it. And I think it's a little bit of a swing in terms of, again, when you're talking about Finnish forwards and players that are coming over from the SDHL, right, it's not guaranteed that it's going to work. And, right, it's no guarantee that Holopainen is going to be an immediate top 6 contributor. It might take her some time to find her bearings. But I keep going back to the offensive ceiling, and I don't think you're getting a player this talented in the open market. And so I don't think the Sirens could afford to pass up on her. One of the things that the Sirens have really, really tried to embrace since last season, when they kind of revamped the roster and got younger, is they leaned into speed. And you heard all the veterans on the team, or even Sarah Fillet, who is, at this point with 2 seasons under her belt, maybe a Sirens veteran, but not a veteran in terms of the PWHL, right? 25 years old. But all the players that had some experience in the Sirens talking about, we're a fast team now. That's something we're going to lean into. We like being fast. We know that we're fast. Holopainen's fast. And you could totally see her really having a lot of success on the rush for New York this season. And again, in this aggressive offense that is going to take chances, is going to look to create scoring chances in transition, Holopainen is someone that can really feast in an offense like that. And so, I think you put that package together. She was the best available player on the board in my eyes. I think Pascal Daou makes the right decision there. Tia Chan's on the board, sure, but again, New York needed top 6, middle 6 contributors. And I think there's a decent chance that Holopainen ends up in New York's top 6 this season. Is it right off the bat? That maybe it's because of need that she starts off in the top 6 right away. But I think talent-wise, is someone that, if she's playing to her full abilities, will deserve to be in a top 6 role. Carina DiAntonio out of Yale. 3rd round pick. They get her at 31 overall. Cushman has her ranked 27. So New York's top 3 picks, New York either meets or got good value on, according to the Cushman boards. He had Peschel ranked 7th. They take Peschel 7th. He had Holopainen ranked 12th. They take her 19th. He had DiAntonio 27th. They take her 31st. We're talking about another player who could be a legit goal scorer. 26 goals in her senior campaign at Yale, tied for 6th in the nation. So this is someone that, can find the scoring spots on the ice and put them home. And New York needs this, right? They lost Taylor Girard. That was a huge secondary offensive weapon. They lost Ann Cherkowski. That was a huge offensive playmaker. They lost Maddie Wheeler, who contributed 10 points. You got to find a way to make all that up. DiAntonio is someone that I think theoretically you plug into the middle 6 and you're hoping, can she give us 5 goals this season? Can she give us 5 to 8 goals? Replicate the Taylor Girard output. I think that would be huge. She describes herself as a very tough player. That is something that she said after the fact when she was getting interviewed by media at draft day. So kind of fits the mold that they're looking for. High IQ player. And interesting trend here is that she's Yale's captain. And the tradition that Yale has across all of their athletic programs, actually, is that they only name one captain. No alternate captains, no assistants. You have one captain on each team. The Sirens have drafted Yale's captain in each of the last 3 seasons. It's El Harchi in 2024, Anna Bargman in 2025, Carina DiAntonio in 2026. So I think that's a little bit of a funny trend there. I think she's someone that fits on the middle 6 as a scoring weapon, which is something New York needed. So it fills a need, and when you hear her talk about herself as high IQ player, an offensive weapon, and I talked to someone that inhabits NCAA circles and Ivy League circles, and he's telling me about Yale products, and he's like, they're all smart, they're all really patient offensively, they're really good at getting defenders to bite and then beating them with a pass the other way. So, it's an Ivy League school. These kids are supposed to be smart. So, I think maybe we'll see that next season. Katelyn Roberts goes 43rd overall in the 4th round. This is where now we get, I think, maybe a split in the consensus. Ian Kennedy has her as a like 4th to 5th round talent. Cushman has her as an honorable mention, not in the top 72. I think there's pros and cons to this one. One of the things she said that I think really caught my ear right away is she sees herself as a power forward. New York needs a power forward. Taylor Girard walked out that door and signed with PWHL Detroit. So New York needs someone that can plop down in front of the net and plant themselves there and make life difficult for goalies and defenders in that area. They need someone that can get some of those dirty goals and can play the net front on the power play. And you look at Katelyn Roberts as someone that can do that plays a heavy game, 5'7", real sturdy build. Like, she's going to be a tough player to move around. I think she's going to be able to throw the body around a little bit for sure. She's got, certainly some offensive touch, can put the puck on net, can score some goals for you. You wonder how much the goal scoring translates to the PWHL. I don't think she's as prolific a goal scorer as Holopainen or DiAntonio. I think otherwise maybe she goes a little bit earlier in the draft. But, certainly someone that fits New York's identity of we're going to play tough, we want to play physical, we want to play grit. The one downside, the one concern that everyone has brought up is the skating. She's not an elite skater. I think that's something that you're going to need to work on this offseason. Right? The good thing is that players can improve their skating. Like, there's certain things that you can't necessarily teach. And a lot of that has to do with, like, offensive sense and hockey sense. A lot of things mentally you can't teach players. It gets to a certain point, you either have it or you don't. Granted, there are some physical traits like there's raw speed, raw acceleration, raw goal scoring. There are certain elements of players' physical attributes that are God-given and you either have it or you don't. But skating is something that you train with the right people, you can improve it, you can get it to a pro level. I think that's something that Katelyn Roberts is going to have to do. She's going to need to get better at skating. Otherwise, I think she's going to have trouble being a part of a Sirens offense that can get very rush-heavy at times. But she certainly fits a need. Now, is she going to be able to fit the Taylor Girard role like 100% right from the jump? I think she's going to need a little more development. I think she's starting off realistically in a bottom 6 role, maybe even a 4th line role, and seeing if she can't take on more playing time as the year goes along. I kind of think maybe following a similar mold to what Anna Bargman did last season, where starts off with 4th line minutes, plays pretty well, and gets to a point where she's getting promoted to the 3rd line and she's on the 2nd power play. Like, I think that's a path that maybe Katelyn Roberts is able to follow here. But again, New York needed a player with a heavier game that they could place in front of the net front and that could give them some size, because a lot of their players are small and fast and undersized, and you need some forwards in this mix here that have a little bit more strength and can play that game in front of the net and can drive to the net and get goals. And that is, I think, Katelyn Roberts. And as a couple cool side notes here, well, she's the first black woman that's been drafted by the Sirens and told a really cool story about growing up. Didn't see a lot of players that looked like me on the men's or the women's side in hockey, and clearly it meant a lot to her. But the other thing that I think should make you excited about this is, she played a somewhat similar system to what the Sirens play at Penn State under Jeff Campersall. And she talked about how excited she was to play in Greg Fargo's system.
Greg Fargo has a system that relies on a relentless attack.
For sure.
How do you think you'll fit into that?
I love that. Something that our offensive coach, McKenna, would say a lot is, like, just consistent pressure is so important. And so that's, like, the style that we love to play is, like, we love to roll on teams, and I wish there was a better word to say this, but, like, suffocate them essentially, and with that offensive firepower. And so that's the system that I've played behind for the last 4 years. I found a lot of success in it. My team and Penn State has found a lot of success in it, and I understand that there's definitely a lot of success that can be found in the PWHL.
So I think it's a big plus that that she has 4 years of experience in a similar system to what Greg Fargo runs with the Sirens. She played on a line with Tessa Janicki for a while and talked about how that made her a really good passer. Had a really funny line, and I'll try to do her comedic delivery some justice here, about if you were in my position, you'd be passing Tessa the puck too. I think, listen, is she going to play a ton of top 6 minutes? Any top 6 minutes? I'm not really sure. So, I don't know how much she's going to be really on a line with like Casey O'Brien or Sarah Fillier or Kristina Kaltenkova or anything like that. But could you see her get power play 2 time? I certainly think so. I think she's actually a prime candidate to work her way into New York's second power play unit as of now. So the fact that she has experience in a system like this, it's not like she can't contribute on the rush. Does her skating need work? Absolutely. Is that something that, again, could limit her offensive success in the PWHL? As of now, probably. But, it's not something that's going to completely take away all the exciting elements about her as a hockey player that I think makes her an interesting investment in the 4th round. They take Grace Wolfe in the 5th round. St. Cloud State defender, which, as I said, is the same college that produced Dale Ross. She was actually freshman year roommates with Dale Ross. They're in the same class. She takes a 5th year to play with the Huskies one more season. The fun thing about St. Cloud State that I think makes them an interesting spot to take defenders is that, they're not a powerhouse. Like, they're not Wisconsin or Ohio State. They have to play on their heels sometimes. And she was asked about that, does that, kind of help you iron out your defensive game? And she seemed to think so. She talked about herself playing different roles at St. Cloud State, that she'll be able to do whatever the Sirens ask of her. Right shot D, I'm not sure how big of a role she's going to play yet with them this season. I still think Dale Ross is ahead of her in the depth chart. Dale Ross's rookie season did not go as planned. The ACL injury in the offseason felt really, really hurt her development coming into that rookie season. I don't think we saw her at her peak. Coming into 2025-26, Dale Ross was an exciting defensive prospect that people talked about as one of their least favorite defenders to play against because of how tough she is and the way that she can play, both physically and just as a really good high IQ defender. I think a full, healthy offseason is going to do a lot of good for Dale Ross. I kind of expect her to be their bottom pair right shot D behind Nyland Person and Bourbonnais. Could Grace Wolfe be their 7th skater, or their 7th defender, rather? I think so. Mobile, which, again, fits the Siren system. This is, in my eyes, it's a depth add. If someone goes down the blue line, someone that probably can fill in and play 3rd pair minutes, has experience running power play, PK. I don't think we're going to see her in the power play a ton on this team, but could you see her out there, on the penalty kill? I think so. Sirens needed to get another defender here. You're not sure what they're going to necessarily be able to do in free agency. It's not a flashy pick, but I think this is a safe, let's get ourselves a defensive-minded defender and add to our depth a little bit. And then the final pick here is Naomi Boucher, who I think, contrary to DiAntonio, who's more of a goal scorer, Boucher is more of a playmaker. Is she going to be a big offensive contributor in the PWHL? It's tough to say so far. What leaps out, and I think she profiles as a 4th-line fit, at least to start. Really good in the faceoff dot, 5th in the nation in faceoff wins last season, 61.4% faceoff win percentage. That jumps out significantly. If you have her and she is either your 4th-line center, which I don't think the Sirens are necessarily hoping for. I think they'd like to have someone with more experience coming into the season as their 4C. But if she is your 4C, you feel good about her in the faceoff dot. You feel good about her as a defensively responsible forward. It's like Wolfe, not a flashy pick, but she checks, I think, a lot of the right boxes. And when you look at what Greg Fargo likes to do with his fourth line, right? He doesn't run the fourth line a lot. He pretty heavy on the top three lines. I don't think you're going to really see Boucher crack any of that. I mean, who knows? Boucher may not make the opening night roster. We might see her as a, on the reserve roster. She may get cut in training camp. It's tough to tell. This is a 12-team draft now. We're seeing players drafted. She was the 67th overall pick. We haven't seen someone drafted in that spot since the inaugural draft, and that was a much wider player pool that had more than just rookies, so it's not really comparable. It's not a guarantee that Boucher or Wolfe, make the active roster on opening day. But if she does, you see how she might be able to fit onto a fourth line. So that's the breakdown. There are some players that I think the Sirens couldn't get that, maybe they were hoping for that are worth talking about. We talked about Brantley and Chan already. Elisa Biederman is the one I really want to talk about because she goes 30th to Hamilton right before New York's pick in the third round. Yeah, I think the Sirens like DiAntonio. Clearly, they like the Yale products. Boucher is another Yale product. So now you've got, as of right now, you got 4 on the team with the 3 captains and Boucher. But Biederman played at Colgate under Greg Fargo and then under his assistant Stefan DeCosse for a couple seasons. And she's another true goal scorer, offensive contributor that people had ranked. Some had her ranked early in the second round. Most had her as a second round talent. And she nearly made it to the Sirens at the third round. I think if she's there at 31, I think you see the Sirens take her and not DiAntonio. But all things considered, you coming away from the third round with one of those two, you're getting a solid goal scorer, and I think the Sirens feel okay about that. My grade. I've got this at a B+. I think it was going to be tough to top last year. When you had the number 1 overall pick, and you have the top pick in every round, it makes it easier to get some of that premier talent. So the Sirens didn't have a chance to get a Kristina Kaltenkova, and they don't trade up to get a player like Casey O'Brien. So there's not nearly as much star power in this year's draft class. There's not going to be as much hype around it. And who knows if there was even, is there a Maddie Wheeler in this draft class? Is there an Ann Trukowski in this draft class? I'm not sure yet. But I think they filled a lot of needs, certainly in the forward ranks. They filled a big need defensively. Would it be more exciting if this draft class was headlined by Kirsten Sims? I think so. But, as we said, they needed to shore up the defense a bit. It's not a bad draft. It's not a bad draft by any means. I don't think that if you add a flyer on a goalie, if Daria Gredzin is here instead of Katelyn Roberts or Grace Wolfe, I'm not sure that changes anything. They could have taken Gredzin ahead of Wolfe because they took Wolfe 55th overall. Gredzin goes 57th. Gredzin's the Russian goalie. Do you feel a little bit better of you have a project at goalie? It would require them realistically cutting one of Kaylee Doyle or using one of their 3 reserve spots on a goalie, which I'm not sure is something that the Sirens are super interested in doing right now. I don't think that having a dice roll on a goalie in the final 4 rounds really sways me in any way. I think I'd rather have the 4 forwards that they added, certainly the top 3 forwards, Holopainen, DiAntonio, Roberts. I'd rather have those 3 than a goalie who you don't feel great about stepping into a starting role or a tandem role right away. So I'm not really gonna knock this draft. I do think Sims would have moved the needle for me in a way that I think it's harder for a defender in Peschel to be as exciting. And again, Sims is a player that some people has the second best forward in the draft. There's a higher ceiling there that I don't know that Peschel is going to be able to reach, at least as we're looking at her coming in. but Peschel's a really good defender to plug in right away, and you got 3 forwards, 2 of which I think plug into the middle 6. Roberts, probably a bottom 6 addition. If she really, really progresses well, I think you'd maybe see her in a third-line role, but realistically, I think coming in as a fourth-liner. What I see here is players that could potentially fill the roles that were vacated by some of the players that left in expansion. Like, I look at Holopainen, and I go, okay, maybe she is the Ann Czerkowski player, the top 6 winger that you're looking at to produce some offense, maybe play in a top-line role or a second-line role. I don't think that she's a particularly similar player to Ann Czerkowski. Czerkowski, more highly touted, more of an offensive ceiling. But Holopainen of this draft class has the highest ceiling offensively and has really legit offensive skills, legit top 6 skills. So she's your plug-and-play for Czerkowski in some sense. I think DiAntonio is maybe your plug-and-play for Wheeler. Again, I don't think that they're necessarily great comps for each other. Wheeler, not as much of a goal scorer, probably a stronger in terms of physicality, brought more to her game in that sense, right? Like, we talk about the things that I think made Maddie Wheeler special last season. Winning puck battles, driving hard to the net, playing this hard, I'd call it a stiff game, right? I mean that in a good way. That I don't know that DiAntonio has that same stiff game, but I think in terms of goal scoring, clearly a potential middle 6 addition. Someone that you plug in where you were playing Maddie Wheeler, which is a good thing. Katelyn Roberts, I don't think she plugs into where Taylor Girard was playing, but I think she fills roles. Like, we kind of talked about that when we were breaking her down, that, like, could she be when Taylor Girard started on the second power play unit and she was at the net front? Is that something Katelyn Roberts could do? I see that as a potential possibility. There are other elements of Taylor Girard's game that I don't necessarily see Roberts stepping into right away. Girard was a better skater. Like, she got healthy and she played on the penalty kill. I don't know that we see Roberts on the penalty kill right away. But again, there's parts of Girard's game that I think Roberts can help replicate. Not all, but parts. Wolfe, depth defender, name any of the, if Lauren Bernard walks out the door, and she's a UFA right now, if she's not coming back, or, insert Olivia Knowles, insert anyone, Wolfe's the replacement there. And Boucher is, your fourth liner that maybe she's your Kayla Vespa replacement. So that's, and maybe, honestly, maybe even an upgrade over Kayla Vespa in terms of what she can do in the faceoff dot. So I've got a B+ grade. I think this is a solid draft. It's not as flashy as last year's draft, but being able to fill a lot of needs, being able to fill a lot of spots in this lineup in front of the net. Again, we will flash up where the lines are again. And again, like, this is, I'm just trying to plug in place here. Like, there's some maneuverability here as we look at, and we'll kind of get into phase 6 and needs. Right now, with the lineup, the way I have it constructed, there's a hole at 3C. But again, you can move El Harchi into that spot and just inject a middle 6 winger, and effectively you're solving that in one way or another. I still think as we get into phase 6 here, and I'll double check on my phone, it's 12:30. I don't know that Elaine Chuli, I got caught rambling a little bit, so I've been checking my notifications. Let me see here if the Elaine Chuli news has come through. I've been told that I'm basically safe to speak on Chuli as New York's goalie, that's something that is happening. But let's see if anything has been confirmed here. Otherwise, we'll kind of just pivot away. I don't see anything, so we kind of did the Chuli talk when we were talking about the decision to not take a goalie. I'm not going to go too much deeper on it. In terms of other targets, the dream one for me is Klara Himlarova. 2 years with Minnesota, a number 15 overall pick that plays. I'm looking at New York here, and I'm thinking, okay, they're really not historically, they haven't been able to get the flashy forwards. And so I'm crossing out Malte and Kendall Coyne-Schofield and any of the forwards that fans would be excited about. I'm kind of crossing out Jesse Eldridge here. I don't think that's super in the cards. But I look at Himlarva, and I see someone that can be a really physical player among Minnesota's leaders in hits last season. I think clearly profiles as a middle six addition, whether that's second line or third line, right? The thing, and I'll flash the lines again, when you look at the way I've got these lines constructed, is a lot of the emphasis on the secondary scoring is on players that historically haven't been like huge scorers in the PWHL yet, or rookies. And again, that's always a big question mark. Himlarv is another one that is not a huge scorer in the PWHL so far, but you like the experience. Like, you feel good about players like Levis and Harchie and theoretically Himlarva in a middle six because they've played this game and it feels like they're on an upward trajectory. And again, I look at Levis and Harchie as two players that in an expanded 12-team league, I think their value's going up. I think they're clearly middle six forwards. Right? I think I've got Levis in the top line right now. I think Levis can play a top line role. She's done it before. Do you feel great about it? Like, she's not your prototypical top line forward. But 5 goals, 10 points last season. It brings a lot in the defensive game. You prefer to have her in a middle six role. It felt like she landed in a good spot last season with that O'Neill, Shishova, Levis line. That was a really fun, defensively responsible line that I thought was a good fit for her. It seems as if Shishova is going to be a UFA. At this point, I don't know how confident I am that she's going to come back. I have to emphasize, I'm going to be transparent here. It's not like I have a ton of league sources here. So a lot of times when I'm going through this stuff, I'm kind of just speculating based on the way I know that the Sirens like to operate with what's available. So, yeah, I looked at Shishova as a fit, but I also kind of wondered if she is someone that, she clearly has suitors. Minnesota loved her for those 2 cup runs. Yeah, I wonder if she's going to have suitors elsewhere and maybe elects to go elsewhere. Gabby Rosenthal signed with Vancouver. That's already happened, so she's kind of cross her off the list if you're looking for a 3C. Maybe I'm wondering about Jade Downey Landry. Seemed to have really good things to say about New York and her time there. I think you'd feel okay with plugging her in as a experienced third line center that gives you some depth in that middle six. I think I'd feel okay about that. It's something to keep an eye on. The other name that caught my eye just because there's a connection to Greg Fargo is Darcy Lappin. She is more of a true, fourth line extra skater type, but New York's going to need some depth. And again, it appears as if they have not re-signed anyone from their expiring list in Phase 5. So that means that Shishova's a UFA, that means Clair DeGeorge is a UFA, that means Savannah Norcross is a UFA, Kayla Vespa, Lauren Bernard, Nicole Vallario, missing a couple others, Olivia Knowles, Kira Judicus, Sarah Bujold. There are a couple surprises here. Yeah, I think Clair DeGeorge was someone that I thought the Sirens would be eager to bring back because she felt like a fit. And I still wonder if Clair DeGeorge is someone that maybe the Sirens can bring back here in Phase 6. I really like her. If they can get her as their fourth line center, I would feel really good about that. I've talked a lot online about I like her as a forechecker. I like her size. I liked everything that she brought to the team in the 8 games that she played with the Sirens. So I was surprised to see her walk. I was surprised to see Vallario walk. Those were the 2 that I thought New York would make an effort to bring back. The reason why you might be seeing New York hold off and kind of wait and see how the landscape settles out is Ian Kennedy reported that the PWHL is capping pre-training camp signings at 19 players. So that means, you can invite you get players on camp invites that don't count as signings. You can get, we'll call it a, what's the word I'm looking for here? Or, the rookies that haven't signed yet. That my understanding is that, like, any of the Holopainen, DiAntonio, Roberts, if they don't sign contracts before training camp, that they won't count towards that number. But from my understanding, I think anyone who is under contract or received a qualifying offer would count towards that list that limit of 19. So you've got 8 players under contract, and you got another 5 that I think have received qualifying offers. Those 5 would be Casey O'Brien, Anna Bargman, Dale Ross, and then the 2 backup goalies, Shanahan and Doyle. So that takes you, if my understanding is correct, that anyone that received a qualifying offer counts as a contract, and it should, because otherwise I don't think you'd be able to protect someone like Casey O'Brien if that doesn't count as a placeholder for a contract, and that essentially is what the qualifying offer is. It's a placeholder with like a 3% salary increase that allows you to negotiate later in the offseason. So that takes you to 13. When the Chuli news breaks, and by all accounts, the Chuli news will break today, that would take you to 14. That leaves 5 spots that could potentially be filled by signings before training camp. And you have to factor in now, is Pascal Daou going to want to get Emma Peschel's deal done before training camp? Right, that's their top draft pick. Do they want to lock her down on a 3-year deal? Do they want to lock up any of the other forwards, right? Like Holopainen or DiAntonio? Are those 2 players that they want to lock up before training camp? Well, if you lock up 2 or 3 of those, now you're at 16, 17, with only 2 more signings left before training camp. And there are still holes on this roster that need to be filled. We talked about maybe another middle 6 or bottom 6 piece. They need to find, I think realistically, maybe another left-handed defender who's going to play next to, let's say, Dale Ross on that bottom pair. That, there are a lot of players that left or that are walking right now in Phase 5 that I think, could you see them get a camp invite? Like, does Savannah Norcross get a camp invite? Does Nicole Vallario get a camp invite if they're not signed by someone else? That's a big if, right? You got expansion teams that have spots to fill. You could totally see an expansion team signing someone like Vallario or signing DeGeorge after the back half of the season that she had. Does Josh Sheba go after Nicole Vallario after coaching her and seeing how she progressed last season as an undrafted rookie? Certainly possible, right? So, again, no guarantee that those players make it, but if they're still on the board by November, maybe they get camp invites. So maybe, if your favorite 4th liner is currently a UFA, I know a lot of you like Savannah Norcross, sky's not necessarily falling just yet. She may be a camp invite come November, and then they'll have a chance to fill out this roster to 23. In terms of left-hand D, I'm really curious to see where they go. Like, is Stephanie Markowski an option for them as maybe a more proven bottom pair defender than someone like Nicole Vallario that I thought flashed some upside, but all things considered, still, fairly sheltered minutes, all things considered. That I think they'd like to have her back, but, maybe entering a season with Nicole Vallario as your fully established 3rd pair left side D, that maybe that's not the best spot to be in and you want a little more experience there. Would you bring back Jinsey Rose? I didn't think that Jinsey Rose's New York tenure completely blew me away, but I also think that at a baseline, she's just a very solid defender with an offensive upside that if you're playing her bottom pair minutes, like, all of her goal rates and expected goal rates were pretty good in a more limited bottom pair role. I think it's when, she's not a top line defender or a top 4 defender anymore. If you're a contender, really, I don't think. If Jinsey Rose is your bottom pair defender, you feel still pretty good about things. She's going to be one of the better ones available here on the UFA market that you could see a reunion with Jinsey Rose in the cards. So I'd throw out Rose and Markowski as two possibilities. We'll see, right? Like I said, I don't want to get too deep in the weeds today on the Phase 6 free agency stuff. If all goes according to plan, I'd like to do that on Monday, but certainly do it sometime next week where we can really go deep into free agency and what the Sirens elect to do. But if you're looking to assess this draft, and I've seen, different takes on the spectrum of reactions. I've seen some people that feel pretty good about it and feel optimistic about things going into free agency. And I've seen the other people that are calling for Pascal Daouz's head or sounding the alarm. We're in trouble. We don't have a goalie. Here's what I'd say. I think it's going to be difficult to really assess this draft until free agency unfolds. And that's the challenge of navigating the draft, is that the Sirens have to do all of this with a vague understanding of how they think free agency is going to go for them. And if they're banking on something that doesn't happen, that might make the draft look worse. But as difficult as it is to do, that's the gig, right? That's it. When you're an executive, when you're in this front office position in a professional sports, that's the job, man. But I think we need free agency to really color how we look at this draft. Because I do think with the goalie discourse, and this is one of the last parts I'll say on it, is that there's a little bit of the boat or mystery box thing that we're getting here. Where, do you want the boat, which is Elaine Chuli, or do you want the rookie goalie, who's the mystery box? And, the Family Guy joke is, the boat's a boat, Lois. The mystery box could be anything. It could even be a boat, I believe is how that goes. And that, I think, is kind of what you're getting with the rookie goalie. The rookie goalie could be anything. Could even be Elaine Chuli. And sure, the rookie goalie could have a higher upside, but there's a higher variable of, I think, either success or failure. Whereas with Chuli, I think you have a better idea of what you're getting. There's no guarantee that it's going to go gangbusters, that she's going to be an elite number one goalie, or that Callie Shanahan's going to be an elite number one goalie. But I think you feel safer with someone that has a base level and a floor of PWHL experience and PWHL production. And that's something that none of the rookie goalies can give you. And outside of Brantley and maybe Chan, I don't know that the upside was worth it on any of them. So that's what I'd say. And a similar thing with some of the other open spots here, and maybe even some of the decisions to let people walk in Phase 5. Again, I'm a little surprised to see DeGeorge walk, a little surprised to see Vallario. Not as surprised with Krizova, but Krizova would certainly be a big, at this point, probably a second-line addition that would move the needle for New York if they can bring her back. We'll have to see how it all unfolds. I think that's it. In terms of articles, I have my draft reaction piece that came out Thursday night. Honestly, a lot of the stuff that was said here today is in that article, but again, I won't say no to page views, and I'm sure that there's stuff that I said more eloquently in my article that maybe I don't talk so good sometimes. I haven't expressed clearly today. Other than that, maybe have some more creative stuff coming up on the horizon. Well, I'll let you know. I gotta set some stuff up first and set up some interviews before I really tease anything. But keep checking my social media. I'll keep posting updates and covering the team and whatnot. But yep, episode 10 of Siren Sounds. Isn't that cool? Nice round double-digit number. Who would have thought? Thank you guys for tuning along. Last week's episode did really good. That made me happy. So I appreciate you guys. Thanks a lot. Take care, everyone. More content coming out next week. Appreciate you guys.